Thank you so much, Jayati and Chandru and Bob, for inviting me. I am still sort of reeling from the last 2 days of the sort of the depth of the crisis. So I just thought I'm going to sort of repeat some things back to you. I've been working on the Green New Deal for the last 5 years, which is where Bob and I first met and started to push advocacy through Congress for the Green New Deal. And then being really troubled by sort of the world crisis that we are in since the pandemic, I started this magazine called Polycrisis with Kate McKenzie. And the image there is from Sri Lanka, and it really encapsulates the sort of the world crisis we are in. Bread, there's no food. The guy in the back lighting the petrol on fire, there's no fuel. People standing outside the petrol pump for days on end to get some fuel. He's wearing a mask. It's still the pandemic. And the whole demo protest is happening in front of the central bank secretariat. That's the dollar debt crisis. Do you really get a sense of compounding, escalating, magnifying crisis? And one of the hopes of the Green New Deal when we sort of came up, when many of us came up with the idea in the late 2000s and then carried it out, was that we would solve not just one crisis, but multiple crises. So just sort of think through sort of some of the things that I've learned, from you guys over the last couple of days. From Danny Roderick, we learned that industry may be desirable, but realistically, services is the way to go for the South. From Jerry Epstein, we learned that the way out for developing countries is to either improve their access to dollar liquidity or to de-link and join a China-led network. From Mark Weisbrot, we learned Congress can be pressured to liberate the hundreds of billions of SDRs. Once again, from Sherry Spiegel, that the South has challenged the North to change this terrible, destructive financial architecture at the UN, and even the US Treasury is now sitting in at UN negotiations. From Richard Kozel-Wright, not only is this hyper-financialized dollar order resilient, it is anti-fragile. It emerges stronger from shocks. From Chandru, we learned the IMF continues to divert focus from external debt restructuring. From Kevin Gallagher, that developing countries need a new growth equation. From Marina Marquez, forget about the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals unless 30, 40 countries get debt relief. From Ashok Devan, forget reigniting growth in developing countries that are debt distressed, because as long as you have external debt burdens, any foreign exchange that their country earns will immediately be siphoned off to pay off its creditors. From Daniel Munwa, the message from Washington is that the cavalry is coming, but it may well be the charge of the Light Brigade. From Avinash Basod, that MDBs should be using their AAA status to smooth the whipsaw of the dollar cycle. And he's at the IDB working with the Brazilians, piloting a FX hedge platform for those green investments. From Jayati Ghosh, the cause of debt distress is not internal to developing countries, but stems from the giant sucking sound that begins when the Fed hikes interest rates. From Leon's, the capital flight from Africa is private wealth, an entire network of connected individuals, corporations, foreign banks, and we've got to invoke the odious debt doctrine. From Isabel Ortiz, that there is a great global austerity shift post-crash, post-COVID, that is dramatically squeezing and punishing the middle and working class, causing societies to boil. From Emma, we need quota reform of the IMF, and there is a window opening for that. From Andres, states are liquid, but they have very, very liquid elites and transnational corporations, and countries should cooperate in and invoke Article 8 in the IMF to block such footloose foreign exchange. From Jomo, that The investment-led global Green New Deal that was proposed by the UN in 2008 was betrayed in 2009. The prices and markets are deadly climate distractions, and the North cannot, will not deliver on international transfers. From Margarita Oliveira, that the austerity is ripping the social fabric apart, and it's a crisis of the care economy that exploits and indebts women. From Zotsi Sataka, no part of Ghana's society has been spared. From Dongo Silla, you've got to build domestic capacity and know-how. From Ahilan, I think the image said it all. From Laura Merling, that there's a vicious circle. Climate financing is coming in, but it's coming in the form of debt. And to service the debt, countries are resorting to extractive industries that make climate worse. From Corina Patricio, the diversity of creditors and the fears of free riding have created a crisis in creditor clubs in Paris, London, and New York. From Esteban Perez, that hurricane disasters are not the fundamental cause of increasing debt in the Caribbean. From Matias, Argentina can't grow, Brazil won't grow. So from everyone, I heard that there is a better way, and that better way is a big climate investment push that would bring prosperity, peace, remake societies, remake production that burns fossil fuel. So let's talk about that. I think we all share this idea that we're in a planetary impasse of trying to solve the climate crisis in a world of huge inequality, and the big questions of who will pay, who will profit, and who will take charge of this energy transition. And we have a polluter elite, the people who control the means of production, who control Congress and parliaments, and emit the most emissions, are the same crowd. So, which sort of brings us to one of the items that I think is really fundamental point here, that climate was always about states, it was always about power, it was always about wealth, and the energy transition, the green transition, whatever you want to call it, is a contest. It's a global contest over profit-driven commercial competition. It's a contest over the global division of labor, and it's a contest over the distribution of economic power. So we need to be thinking in terms of political economy and definitely in terms of state power. This is not lost on anyone. This is Lula from the Paris Climate and Debt Summit last June, where he says, in the last 200 years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it has been the rich states that have polluted the world and not the African or Latin American peoples. And they must pay the historical debt that they have with the planet Earth. And we cannot accept a green neocolonialism that imposes trade barriers and protectionist policies under the pretext of protecting the environment. That's not the only conflict, as Bob was saying. There's also the conflict between rich and poor. And he says at that same speech, my war is here against hunger, against poverty, and against unemployment. And it's not possible that in a meeting on climate and debt and sovereign debt and climate finance, as that meeting was, it's not possible that in such a meeting the word inequality does not appear. Salary inequality, race inequality, gender inequality, education, health. We are in an increasingly unequal world, and wealth is concentrated in fewer and fewer people. So those are the two big issues. What are southern states doing to get out of what may very well be the green transition pulling up the ladder once again? Well, they're devising all kinds of plans for big state-led green transformation. These are some of the plans coming out from Africa, which is convert its abundant renewables potential into manufactured products. In this case, Hydrogen Alliance that was launched by Mauritania, Egypt, Kenya, Namibia, South Africa in 2022. the basic idea is to move up the value chain by producing hydrogen. And this work is these plans are sort of being floated by each countries, and I think we really need to take sort of more careful looks at how countries are actually planning to escape the being pushed down the ladder and neo-colonial sort of vision. I'll just go back to Lula and talk about the view from Brazil. And I really think we need to be thinking about the views from different places. I'm not sort of giving us, so we'll talk about the view from Brazil, the view from Indonesia. So the view from Brazil, in his victory speech when he won the election, flanked by trade unionists and landless peasants, Lula pledged to pursue strategic non-alignment. We will not accept a Cold War between the US and China. We will have relations with everyone. China is already Brazil's largest trading partner, and Brazil chose not to join the G7 sanctions on Russia, citing its agricultural sector's dependence on Russian fertilizers. South-South cooperation has thus been a big theme of his presidency. His victory speech mentioned South American Caribbean alliances, the BRICS alliance, and collaboration with African countries. But the main thing in Brazil, where most of its emissions come from, is obviously the Amazon. And Lula said in that same speech, we will resume the monitoring and surveillance of the Amazon and combat any and all illegal activities, whether they be mining, logging, or improper cattle ranching. So when Lula was last in power, the soybean and beef moratoriums had reduced Brazil's deforestation of the Amazon by 80% between 2004 and 2012, even as Brazilian agricultural production had boomed. And there was a transnational effort. Norway paid over $1 billion to Brazil for avoided deforestation, but the main thing was Brazilian law enforcement agencies actually enforced the law using Indian and Chinese satellites to monitor deforestation from space, while police and prosecutors enforced the law on the ground. And it was Bolsonaro's parliamentary coalition of rural agribusiness interests, the so-called Beef, Bible, and Bullets coalition, that blew up that deal. Without Lula-era enforcement of environmental laws, criminal gangs and agribusiness companies pushed the soya and beef frontier further into the Amazon and into the Cerrado, driving a massive spike in deforestation. The most egregious culprit was the meatpacking company JBS, which runs the world's largest slaughterhouse, processes a quarter of the planet's beef, and whose emissions from deforestation are larger than all of Italy's. And as soon as Lula gets back into power, the enforcement coalition is back, and the coalition ends up enforcing the decades-old forest code that has now seen Amazon deforestation dramatically reduced. So that gives you a sense of what a political economy coalition looks like that can stem emissions versus one that sort of goes berserk. But the really interesting part of the political economy in Brazil now is that crude, and which is relevant to this, is that crude oil is also a significant source of Brazil's export income, not far behind soybeans. And so Lula just dismissed talk of ending national oil extraction. This is a productivist government. He's going to be expanding Petrobras oil production from 3 million barrels a day to 4 million barrels a day. But they will exert more control over Petrobras. They'll seek to move up the value ladder by doing more domestic refining capacity and also get Petrobras to start producing more renewable electricity. So this is sort of the view from Brazil. The view from Indonesia, which Bob did not fully get to, but the view from Indonesia is another similar strategy of using a single lead sector, using some strategic resources in the country. So what Joko Widodo, what the main move was to start nationalizing metals, and in particular nickel and copper, which are both essential for the energy transition, and to move up the value chain by incentivizing investment in processing facilities. If this dream of becoming an electrostate is new, the tools are very old. Indonesia is simply copying the developmentalist state successes of the East Asian tigers, the 1970s nationalization drives of the OPEC countries, There were howls of outrage from the European Commission and the World Trade Organization, where Jokowi banned exports of nickel, forced international companies to refine and process it domestically, and got technology transfer to state-owned enterprises. Why was he able to do that? Leverage. Indonesia has the largest nickel reserves in the world, with the majority controlled by its state-owned mining company. So after Jokowi banned those nickel exports, Chinese companies agreed to set up joint ventures in Indonesia with a transfer of critical high-pressure acid leach HPAL technology that is required to make battery-grade nickel. And with Germany's Volkswagen, Brazil's Vale, and the US's Ford and Tesla, that initially were getting unprocessed raw nickel out of the country, they were now forced to get a processed one. And the next step that they took was grab more of the value chain by creating an EV-producing national champion, Indonesia Battery Corporation, and striking deals with the Chinese CATL and South Korea's LG now that they have that critical HPAL technology and can produce their own battery-grade nickel. So that's what I mean when I say that, we have a contest, a commercial contest, a geopolitical contest. And since I just have a few more minutes, I'll just end on the problem. So this is right outside my house in New York last year, with orange sky, with the Canadian wildfires billowing smoke and ash into tens of millions of people's lungs all across North America. So in other words, this is sort of a step change, right? That's not a normal curve. We are running into into high extremes. That's the flooding from last year, and extremely catastrophic flooding. That's 2023's ocean temperatures that have been outrageously high. All the meteorological forecasts for the hurricane season this year are an extreme hurricane season, last seen in 2004, when we had the largest amount of insurance losses in the Caribbean. We are expected to see 32 hurricanes this year, named storms. Last year, there were 20. So I think we are going to see a step change in catastrophic losses and perhaps a huge change in the insurance market from 2024, at least from all of these projections. And of course, as Bob was saying, we are not stopping coal, oil, and gas production. We are currently at record oil, record gas, record coal production, reaching a new record in 2023, together with record flying, and most worryingly, a political backlash by right-wing parties across Europe. That's the image from European Parliament, which we currently expect to see a far-right wave in the elections this year. And I think we do know the story in the United States. So that's just perhaps a useful corrective to a very blinkered economic sort of way of thinking about the climate problem. I think we should really insist on thinking of it as a problem of interstates, a problem of power, a problem of wealth, and deeply a problem of political economy. Thank you.
I've kept all separately because they came late.
Separately, the new one, right?
Yeah, new one. The one you sent today.
Oh, no, I sent yesterday.